Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be exploring the topic of moving your intelligent document processing to the cloud. My name's Tom Kopok. I run one of the solution engineering teams here at Kofax and I'm joined today by my colleague Jesper. So in the webinar today we're going to be looking at how to move your document processing or intelligent document processing workloads to the cloud. So we're going to start off exploring why companies are moving to the cloud and some of the benefits that you can gain over traditional deployments in self-hosted data centers. We'll explore how you can make a business case internally to justify that migration, and then look at some of the different offerings that are available, or different ways of running these workloads in the cloud, and some of the considerations that you should take into account when choosing the right cloud offering for you. We'll also quickly look at how to link in physical infrastructure. So some of you may be scanning physical documents. So how do you scan locally but still process in the cloud? So we'll look at how we can link that together. And then I'll hand over to Jesper, who's going to walk you through two case studies from Kofax customers who've made this transition already. So of course, cloud's a huge topic in the press at the moment, in the IT industry, and wherever we look, we're seeing different companies in all industries moving their IT infrastructure into the cloud. So PwC is saying 78% of executives that they surveyed had adopted cloud already in all or most of their business. We're seeing various analysts predicting the growth here. Fortune Business Insights saying that by 2029, it'll grow from around $500 billion industry at the moment to nearly a $2 trillion industry. Similar figures from Forrester. Nearly a quarter of all global tech spend will be on cloud solutions. And Deloitte is saying up to as much as 85% of the businesses they work with are already using 2 or more cloud platforms, and over a quarter of them are using actually 5 or more different cloud solutions. So why are so many companies choosing to invest in the cloud and move their computing a solution and applications into cloud infrastructure? So there's a huge number of very compelling reasons why companies would choose to make this transition. So in the cloud, there's capacity on demand. You don't have to wait for servers to be racked up. You don't have to buy the servers, wait for them to be racked up, turned on, installed before you can actually use that capacity. So if your project is fast growing or your digital transformation journey is accelerating, you don't have to wait around for new capacity. You can get that capacity on demand. It's secure, fast, scalable, reliable. So a lot of the infrastructure you need to get a high level of availability is the cost of that's actually shared between multiple clients of the cloud providers. So the actual cost to get a much higher level of reliability of your systems is actually reduced compared to if you host and build that infrastructure yourself. Of course, we live in a world where there's a lot of remote access. Hybrid working is the main, probably the main way of working nowadays. So giving employees access to these systems from wherever they happen to work is actually a great advantage. And you've got the cloud provider is continually upgrading and maintaining the latest versions of technology. So it becomes much easier to stay ahead of the curve, access the latest innovations, the latest artificial intelligence and other capabilities that might be available without the overheads of having to do those upgrades and migrations yourself. And there's a lot of other benefits as well. So typically the upfront cost is reduced in cloud environments. You only pay only paying really for what you're consuming, so it's easier to run pilots, to start small and then grow, whereas in a traditional project you have to plan for the eventual scale and spend a lot of money up front to make sure you get there. So this gives you a faster time to value. So because an environment's ready when you need it, you don't have to wait for it to get racked up. You don't have to go through a lengthy internal process to secure that equipment or a place in the schedule to deploy that equipment. Typically, you get much faster time to value, much more flexibility about how you use those resources. And in terms of overall cost, typically there's fewer in-house IT resources needed, fewer administrators, and people actually managing a data center on your behalf. So that should reduce your overall costs. So there's a lot of reasons why people are looking, and we could probably summarize this, a better experience. So reduced complexities in terms of setting up systems, administration, security, infrastructure. Much easier to scale in the cloud without hitting any sort of capacity bottlenecks. If you get a peak in demand, you can just dynamically add more capacity into the system to meet that demand. High availability, predictable service levels and uptime, typically at a lower cost than setting those up yourself. And of course, the ease and speed of deployment. So faster time to value with fewer risks and overhead to get there. And as we said earlier, always being on the latest version, or at least always having access to the latest version if you want to use it, without the cost and complexity of planning the migration of your own infrastructure and the upgrade of your own infrastructure. So lots of really good benefits of moving to the cloud. So if you think this could be a journey you want to go on, how would you start to make that business case? How would you start to assess whether there's going to be a good financial return for you if you did move to the cloud? So we start with looking at your current situation. How are we running our systems at the moment? What services do we provide? And what are the challenges that we encounter? So try and look at the costs. So baseline the cost of running your existing systems, but also take into account some of the kind of hidden costs. So obviously there's the obvious things like the hardware that you need, but also there's maintaining the data center or the building that these assets sit in. There's the power, the lighting, the cooling, the cleaning, that's required to maintain that infrastructure. And also look at the sort of capital costs versus the operational expenses. So typically, if you're hosting this infrastructure yourself, there's a higher upfront cost. You've got to buy the hardware to run stuff on. You've got to deploy that. You've got to wire it in. You've got a lot of steps to go through before you even get to log in and start building your project or start configuring the documents to be processed. So when you move to the cloud, typically the cost profile of your project changes, and much more of the cost is operational cost, and you're paying as you actually do the work, so you get a faster return on that investment. Whereas in a capex model, you've got a high upfront cost, and it takes you a while to recoup that investment. So then look at the desired state. If you move to the cloud, what's the solution going to look like? And start to shape out the project. Who are the stakeholders? What's the scope of the project? What are the goals that you want to achieve? Also take into account some of the security and compliance requirements. Whenever you're moving or processing data and documents in the cloud, you need to consider what personal information is on there, whether it's sensitive corporate information, whether it's PII or credit card information or anything like that, and put appropriate controls in place and make sure that you're managing that data in compliance with regulations like GDPR or the California Privacy Act. And then, once you've got an idea of that desired solution, a little bit of what that's going to look like, start to look at the potential costs and benefits of that. So, that's how much would it cost to set up, and but also things like what skills do we need, how much do we have to, retrain, do we need to go and hire people, if there's any additional sort of non-financial benefits. Perhaps you've got a corporate strategy to be carbon neutral, and typically cloud providers are running using renewable energy, so you can actually accelerate your transition to being a net carbon neutral business by moving out of your own data centers, which are obviously very energy intensive, into ones where you can guarantee that they're going to be run by from renewable sources of power. Or it might be aligning to your corporate strategy for hybrid working and so on. So make sure you've identified the different benefits, both financial and non-financial, that you want to achieve, and position your business case in alignment to that broader corporate strategy. And then start to look at what would our plan look like? Is there any natural timing when it makes more sense to move to the cloud. Perhaps you've got a big upgrade to your software that you need to roll out, or you need to refresh the hardware it's on, and that could be a natural sort of decision gate where it makes more sense to migrate into cloud infrastructure. And of course, determine how you're going to measure success and over what kind of time frame. So, typically with cloud you can be more flexible, so it allows you to start small and grow. So you want to have key milestones where you deliver new capabilities or deliver capabilities back to your business, but also have that longer term vision about where you're going and what other projects and solutions you might want to put into that cloud infrastructure, and how those are going to accelerate the return on investment or the benefits that you hope to achieve, and really map out how you're going to achieve that value over time. So here I'm not going to talk about this in too much detail, but here's some of the different areas of costs that you might want to take into account. So from the acquisition cost to buying hardware and software licenses, to the running cost of maintaining and supporting that infrastructure, things like training costs, things like security infrastructure and monitoring, as well as obviously personnel costs and how much it costs to to hire the right skill sets that you need. So when you're looking to move to the cloud, there's a couple of sort of key decision points. So what's the right cloud model for you? There's a lot of different models available, and I'll touch on those in a moment. What's the right, what do you need to do in terms of data security, service levels agreements and compliance and so forth? And, how do you actually start to plan that cloud migration? So there's typically three different models for the cloud that we see. So one is what we call infrastructure as a service, where really your cloud provider like Amazon or AWS, Amazon Web Services, or Azure provide and manage all of the infrastructure on your behalf. So here we often see customers essentially lifting and shifting their existing applications and putting them into the cloud, but not necessarily changing how they run and operate those applications. So the benefit here is the physical infrastructure, the data center, the physical security is all managed by the cloud provider, but the company would still end up managing the operating systems, configuring the network, managing databases, and basically installing and maintaining the solutions. So it gives a lot of flexibility, and it changes the cost profile, but it still gives a lot of control to the company. The next sort of level is what we'd call a platform as a service. And here the company the cloud provider not only runs the hardware, but actually provides a complete environment for building your automations and your document processing projects. So it's not just operating systems and databases, but actually they provide the environment for which you can deploy your, either deploy code if you're using a code-based solution, or all the hooks and tools to configure the platform to meet your exact workflow needs. So examples there in, say, the public cloud world might be AWS Lambda, where you can run code without having to worry about the servers that the code runs on. In the Kofax world, this would be solutions like Total Agility Cloud, where we're giving you the capability to configure your project, but we're taking away all of the administration, all of the upgrading of the infrastructure, and you just log into the web browser and start building your workflows. The third level is sort of software as a service. And here the cloud provider gives you pre-built applications for specific use cases. So instead of a toolkit to build really any project, it's a pre-built project for, say, for example, invoice processing would be a good example of document processing in the cloud. And here really all aspects of the solution is managed by the cloud provider, and the end customer is given configuration options for how they want to integrate, how they want to upload and manage the documents, how they want to set up security and single sign-on. But those options are really constrained by the type of solution that is offered. So good examples from Kofax would be solutions like AP Essentials, or our Sign.Cloud for e-signatures, or Printix for managing your print infrastructure in the cloud without having to worry about print servers. In the public cloud world, Solutions like, say, Dynamics 365 offered by Microsoft give you a complete CRM solution in the cloud without customers having to worry about installing it, managing it, and really they just configure the CRM to meet their requirements. So different options, each with different benefits, different cost profiles, and different overheads. One is not better than the other. It really depends on your project requirements. And in a few moments, Jesper's going to talk through some case studies of customers who've gone down the infrastructure as a service route and moved their existing workload into the cloud. And then we've going to look at a platform as a service example where a customer has moved to use the Total Agility Cloud. So an important topic is data and security and the service levels. So when you're exploring data security, always ask, where data is hosted, how is it processed, is it encrypted, when is it encrypted, is it ever unencrypted, who from the cloud providers team can access that data and under what circumstances, and obviously how are these systems monitored and tested. So the key thing here is to be compliant with your own internal policies and obviously the legislation for the countries you operate in. So things like GDPR or the California Consumer Privacy Act are really important if you're processing any personal data. It's also helpful to look to see whether the cloud provider has relevant certifications. So there's industry standard certifications for the way you operate your cloud environment and work with other end customers' data. So look out for things like SOC 2 or Systems and Organization Controls for SOC, or ISO 27001 as really common best practice certifications your cloud provider should have. So also look at what service level they offer. So when you're contracting with the cloud provider, they will give you a guarantee a certain service level. So that means how highly available the system is, and really look at the numbers, because there's a big difference between a 99% uptime, which equates to about 7 hours downtime a month, and say 99.9% uptime, which is only 45 minutes downtime per month. So these can be written into the contract, but obviously you need to know what those numbers mean and make sure you're choosing the right level for you. Also look at things like the recovery point objective and recovery time objective. So these are in the worst case disaster, would any data be at risk of loss, and how much of the data would be at loss? So typically, that might be an hour's worth of data, or a few minutes worth of data, or a few seconds worth of data. So it's important to know what that worst case scenario is and how long it would take to get the system back up and running if there was that worst case outage. And also consider, how fast the service responds. Do you need a service that can process documents and return data in real time? And what does real time mean to you, or is it purely batch processes, for example? And all good cloud providers should give you transparency of monitoring. So actually tell you if there's any outages or security breaches, and be able to publish that information on the internet. And obviously look as well at compliance. What policies does the cloud provider maintain? How do they go about hiring their staff? What's their their ethical stance on things like environmental protection, modern slavery, and so on, and make sure that they have the right policies in place and maintain those. And typically you can have an interaction with the cloud provider and submit your information security requirements or questions to them, and that they'll respond and let you know how they address those concerns. So when it comes to the migration, look at the different milestones in a plan. So there's some really good information out on the internet. So AWS and Azure provide things like the Cloud Adoption Framework, which is really detailed ways to plan your migration into the cloud. But at a high level, make sure you've got a clear strategy. Make sure you know how success is going to be measured. Put a plan in place with milestones. Make sure you've captured the requirements and they're addressed by your plan. Make sure you've got the right training programs in place, and you're choosing a cloud provider and an implementation model that meets your requirements. And then when you get into the actual sort of doing the migration, consider things like, do I need to parallel run with my existing infrastructure to make sure I'm getting the same performance? Make sure you've got a plan to test the resiliency and understand what would happen in the event of a failure, and look at how you operate and govern that platform, and whether you want to do things like continuous deployment of new projects, or whether you're going to have longer release cycles with more lengthy testing, because the cloud offers you a lot of flexibility to evolve the speed at which you drive your transformation program. So you really want to be able to plan for that and account for that, and in the way that you operate and govern your platform to get the best use of that. And finally, when it comes to physical infrastructure, if you're scanning documents, understand, well, what are the sources of those physical documents? How do they get into your system at the moment? Is this high volume batch jobs or ad hoc scans from a multifunctional device in your office, or even a mobile app? If you're doing a lot of high volume scanning, what are the network bandwidths, and what's the reliability of the connections you've got? Will these meet your needs? And as I was saying earlier, do you need real-time capabilities, or is it a fire and forget? And then really scope your solution appropriately. If it's ad hoc jobs, a lot of intelligent document processing solutions are going to provide the ability to scan straight from a web browser and configure how the device captures those documents from the browser. You could also scan straight to cloud storage and then consume it from the cloud storage into your automation platform. Or if it's really high volume, maybe you need a local gateway and local scanning to manage the flow of documents into the cloud. If you're using mobile devices to capture the documents, do you need a dedicated mobile app which controls the capture experience, or can you use a pre-built app which is going to be faster to deploy but offers less flexibility in terms of user experience? So now I'm going to hand over to Jesper, who will talk through some customer success stories, looking in detail at clients of Kofax who have already made that journey into the cloud. Over to you, Jesper.
Thanks a million, Tom. And I'm going to dive right in because I've got two great success stories to share with everyone. The first one I want to touch upon is Royal Haskoning DHV, one of the leading international engineering consulting firms, headquarters right here in the Netherlands. And also a very happy Kofax customer. They've been using Kofax Total Agility for document processing, running on-premise for quite a while. And following what you might want to call a corporate mandate, they had to do away with their data centers and move everything to the cloud. Royal Haskoning DHV then worked with our partner DocsPro in determining the right course of action and the right way forward for them. Of course, already being very happy with Total Agility, the option to just take their configuration and migrate that to the Kofax managed Kofax Cloud with the Total Agility platform running as a service was essentially a no-brainer. But they still had to do their due diligence. And after a bit, this was a great success for both Royal Haskoning DHV and for DocsPro, and of course for Kofax as well. But they actually decided to write a case study on this whole process. And of course, I understand if your Dutch is a bit rusty, but again, with the magic of modern AI, I'm able to translate that live here for you. And there are some real gems in this article, so I would recommend everyone to give this a read. And then, of course, with the magic of PowerPoint, I'm going to make sure that you can actually follow this QR code and get to the Dutch article, and then you can use your translation service of choice to give it a read, and I would strongly recommend everyone to do that. Okay, well, let's switch gears and let's talk about ABN AMRO, one of the leading Dutch banks, and again, also a very happy Kofax customer for quite some time already. Originally, they started off with Kofax RPA, and that then became the bank-wide enterprise standard for robotics. And after a while, they also selected Kofax Total Agility as the bank-wide enterprise standard for intelligent document processing. And a bit later, they started with Project Apollo. And similar to the story with Royal Haskoning DHV, this was a bank-wide initiative, so the whole organization had to do that. However, in this case, the decision was already made that everything needed to move to Microsoft Azure. And as with all these initiatives, they needed a pilot project, a guinea pig, if you'd let me say that. And they selected Kofax RPA for being that pilot project. So once we were able to move Kofax RPA successfully to the cloud, Total Agility, but also all of the other platforms and solutions and all of the great technology that ABN AMRO uses would follow in Kofax RPA's footsteps. So in this case, the goal was already set, and along the road to that goal, there were a lot of great things to touch upon. Things like containerization, Docker, but also managing those containers maybe with Kubernetes. And of course, Azure then offers that as Azure Kubernetes services, but also things like DevOps, and in extension of that, the whole CI/CD approach was all intertwined with this cloud migration. So it really became a transformative initiative for the whole bank. So what they needed with that pilot project is they needed a guide, and we as Kofax, we picked that up, and we really wanted to make sure that we can help them along the way and act as that guide. And Tom already touched upon the migration process and a bit of the framework thinking that we have in place. What I'd like to talk about is how you can then adapt that to fit your own initiatives, to fit your own corporate strategy, if you will. So this was the approach that ABN AMRO thought about, and you can see indeed step one, lift and shift, just take whatever you have on-prem, move it to the cloud. Step two, make sure that you can already start leveraging a lot of the integrations that you then have. Step three, optimization, start using cloud native capabilities. So in this case, if you're using a database server on one of those VMs that you've migrated, you can then indeed migrate those to, let's say, Azure SQL. And if you then follow along and you go to step number 4, where you want to make sure that you have everything out of the VMs into containers, you want to add Kubernetes on top of that for things like auto-scaling, for redundancy, for true container management, and following that, also the more cloud-native CI/CD DevOps approach as well. And this, of course, brings a lot of value to organizations. So one of the things that's going to drive this whole initiative is, on the one hand, cost saving, by making sure that you have that very flexible approach to the hardware costs, you might say. Of course, that's going to be Azure costs, where you want to optimize that as well. But there were a lot of things to keep in mind and a lot of lessons learned by ABN AMRO. Of course, you might then want to summarize them as, okay, don't overthink your choice, work closely with vendors. So that was Kofax, govern that cloud journey as well, DevOps, that whole way of thinking, way of working, the CI/CD mindset, almost automatically follows with the cloud initiative. So make sure that you embrace that from the get-go. But again, don't expect a big bang on that as well. Baby steps first, crawl, walk, run, and make sure that you don't just see a cloud migration as just a lift and shift and that's all. No, make sure that you're able to leverage those cloud native managed solutions, like the example I just talked about for databases. So you might then say, well, this all sounds like a great story, Jesper. Are there any more tips that you want to give us following that success? Well, again, Kofax and ABN AMRO together wrote a white paper on how this whole Apollo project went for Total Agility and for Kofax RPA, how they moved to their cloud of choice, in this case Microsoft Azure. And again, you're going to be able to download that white paper. And again, with the power of PowerPoint, here's the QR code. Just follow that, leave your details, and give this a read. Again, We've all been working very hard on this. We're very proud of this. Both Colfax, ABN AMRO, and all of the results coming from this have been very impressive. So that's it for me. What I'd like to do is I want to hand you back, and we can start Q&A, because I'm assuming there are a lot of questions from the audience already. So I would say thanks so much, and let's see if we already have some questions.